Well done, Samuel. You made it, and now you just have about 20 more minutes left for us to grill you, and I look forward to your answers.
All right.
The first question I have for you, and each of us will have 4 minutes and then 4 for the audience,
Sweet.
is do you believe that there's hope of peace in our lifetime?
That's a very tough question, because the solution that the Palestinians would settle for is kill all the Jews. So unless UN involvement with Palestinian schools ended, Hamas was ended, and the Palestinian Authority was ended, I'm not sure if peace could be achieved.
Now, what do you think the U.S. role should be? Is what we've been doing adequate? Is there something we should do differently?
So throughout Israel's 70 years, since 1948, the U.S. hasn't done too much. We've had some really great moments. We were the first nation to recognize them as an independent country. We have sent them a lot of aid over the years. And recently, with the new U.S. administration, we've been doing a lot more to aid Israel. And so I think if our involvement continues the way it is now, things will be okay. I do believe the U.S.'s role is to be a friend and ally with Israel, because Israel is the only country in the Middle East that shares our values, that is a democracy where people live similar lifestyles to us in the U.S. And both nations were founded on Judeo-Christian principles. So I do believe the U.S.'s role in the conflict is to be a close friend and supportive friend of Israel.
Out of all the topics you could have picked, what drove you to spend hours and hours and hours on this one?
I really care about it. It's actually something I haven't always known that much about the conflict, but I have always, even from a very young age, cared about Israel, even when I had no idea what it was. And my interest in it just grew and grew. I did a paper on a similar topic in 10th grade, and when it came to choosing a topic for thesis, I wanted to pick something controversial that I wouldn't get tired of in a hurry, and I wanted it to be a problem that I could try to fix, and that's what drove me to choosing this topic.
All right, and I'll yield my last 10 seconds or so to the next judge.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, Samuel, for a very well-researched and very well-presented thesis.
Thank
so
you.
My first question is kind of piggybacking on Brandon's question about the U.S. So in the 70s, 80s, 90s, the U.S. tried to present itself as a sort of a neutral mediator, right? Kind of as a third party, bringing together Israelis and Palestinians, for instance, in Oslo and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
Do you think that it is actually possible to be a neutral in this conflict?
No. Well, I suppose it could be, and you could stay out of the conflict on the basis that it's their business and they should handle it the way they want to. It's just that I see the conflict as a real living battle between good and evil. And I don't think I believe you could stay out of the conflict, but I think you should at least have a side and have an opinion of what is right and what is wrong. Because in the name of neutrality, you could just be completely ignorant, or you could be like the UN, who have actually been funding Hamas for years. So perhaps you could stay out of the conflict, but I don't think you could remain neutral, nor do I think you should.
Okay. So again, like I said, very well researched.
Thank you.
Obviously went the extra mile in discovering sources. I'm curious, did your research ever lead you to the kind of a history of the Arabs in Palestine, basically between 629, when the Arabs invaded and took over, and 1948, when the State of Israel was founded, and the wars began? What were they doing in that region?
They inhabited the region. They didn't do much with it before the Jews started migrating back to the region in the late 1800s. Nothing had... The productivity of the region had not increased. The Arabs had done nothing to cultivate the region. I do know during the Crusades, the Crusaders and the Muslims massacred thousands of Jews. The only time Jews, Christians, and Muslims have been able to worship freely in the area was when it was under Jewish rule. I know the Jews and Christians under Muslim rule were technically protected peoples, which was just an excuse to tax them outrageously. And I know many Muslim rulers demanded Jewish virgins for their harems and things like that. But many Muslims and Jews coexisted very happily. In fact, there are many other ethnic groups in the area that are Muslims, but are very patriotic Israelis.
And time for our next judge, please. Thank you.
Oh, thanks very much. Very good job. It's not an easy subject. It's very, very dynamic, change like almost every day.
Yes.
With many aspects indeed. And I believe you did a really great job by breaking it up to historical portion, geopolitical, religious subjects, and so on.
Thank you.
So I'll ask you the first question is, you mentioned in your paper that on your thesis that I began researching online, which was easy and efficient.
Yes.
What was difficult then
What was difficult?
for you in this part of preparing this thesis, developing it?
Where do I begin?
The most difficult, then you go back.
It was very difficult to find truthful and honest news sources because there are so many in the media and so many popular media outlets that are pro-Palestinian and have been misled into being pro-Palestinian. So it was hard to find people on my side, and it was hard to break it down into the separate problems and identify every little thing that led to every bigger thing, because there's so much in this, and so and then writing it was really tough. But there's just so much. There's so much in this conflict, and like I could have written the whole thesis on the refugee crisis alone. But what's very difficult is that if you keep researching, you will always find something new that helped cause this thing you thought you knew everything about.
Thanks. Regarding that, you've been already asked, in kind of maybe a little bit of different flavor about the solution. It seems like presidents, prime ministers, kings, politicians try to solve it. Throughout your research and writing the thesis, did you forge any ideas of how this might, I'm not saying will, but might be solved for kind of a, maybe it was different than what you thought when you started the thesis.
Right.
And when you end up, you forge some different options.
You mean peace options, like possible routes to peace?
Maybe not even a peace. Maybe you forge an idea that it's never going to be solved, or to solve it, you have to do A, B, C.
Okay.
I mean, just by reading all those, because I went through the articles that you listed and so on, they're very, very good. So I just wanted to know if you forged some ideas that you didn't have before of what might.
Well, I don't know of any way that peace could be concluded with the Palestinians, as I said earlier, because their solution is not a very tasteful one. So it could continue the way it is, with Hamas controlling all of Gaza behind the border fence, and the Palestinians existing in their state in the West Bank. Or Israel could annex Gaza and the West Bank and make everyone Israeli citizens. But then you still have the problem of some of them are terrorists, and you don't really want them in your state. So there's also this constant deal that Israel has with Jordan, where at any time at all, Jordan can annex the West Bank and make the Palestinians their problem. But Jordan doesn't want the Palestinians. Egypt doesn't want Gaza. So I'm not sure if peace could be concluded ever, because it's so difficult. Yeah.
Good.
Okay.
Thank you. On to our next judge.
Okay.
Well done.
Thank you.
For all your work in.
It was mandatory.
Yes. In your studies, and as you research, what was the best argument you came across advocating for not your position? And how would you answer? Not the weakest one, but what's the strongest one that may have been difficult to wrestle with?
That's a good question. Huh. Let me see. I'm not sure. I have had issues with, with my arguments, with arguing for my side, but in my, as I did more research, I always found solutions or the truth or something like that. So I'm not sure if I could pinpoint like the toughest one. I know the killing of civilians. That's a hard one to argue against, because obviously killing civilians is wrong. But I found out very early on, actually, that civilians are usually paid by Hamas to be martyrs and even encouraged, and the children from a very young age are taught by the UN to be martyrs. And so that was difficult in the beginning. But I'm not sure if I could pinpoint an exact one.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
But no, that's actually
Okay.
good. Hard to wrestle with that one. Okay, so about this. the metric you're using to determine Israel's legitimacy as a nation to hold that land and to be a state is not applied consistently across the world. Like our country, even the state, wouldn't pass muster if those criteria were used to determine our ability to be here. So why is it appropriate in this instance? Why is how long they've been there and how they got the land, why is that set of rules or criteria to be legitimate good for this Israeli-Arab conflict?
I understand your question, but I'll explain. Okay. So this same situation has not happened anywhere else in the world, where the native people group inhabiting a land lost their sovereignty for 2,000 years and then regained it fairly and diplomatically. And so, yes. Also, I'm saying Israel has a right to exist. One, because it is the origin place of the Jewish people. It's where they came from. So a Jewish nation does have a claim to that land. There is no other older people group with a claim to that land that is alive today. From my religious perspective, I believe God gave the land to the Jews, but a secular guy wouldn't go for that. They have not done anything illegal in establishing themselves as Israel, the Jewish state, or in taking any of the land that they govern today.
All right,
Okay.
thank you.
And that's all the time we have for our judges.
Thank you.
We'll now field questions from the audience.
Okay. Righteous. Mr. Moore.
American Christians should be more loyal to the state of Israel or Palestinian Christians?
It depends. Do the Palestinian Christians identify ethnically as Palestinian? Do they hate Israel? It depends. But if they are Palestinian Christians that are not anti-Israel, then Christians should not be against them, and the Israelis are not against them either. As I said in my paper, Israel is against Hamas and the Palestinian Authority, but not Palestinian civilians. Israel gives tons of aid to Palestine every year. Food, clothes, building materials. So if they're peaceful Palestinian true Christians, then a Christian should not have any difficulty being on their side and for Israel at the same time. Does that answer your question?
Thank you very much. Very interesting, well-ordered, the rhetoric was good.
Thank you.
Are you suggesting that a Christian would not be politically opposed to Israel?
It depends on what you mean by politically opposed. Obviously, I think a Christian can disagree with the Knesset, the Israeli government. A Jew can disagree with the Knesset, with government policies. But I don't think a Christian should be opposed to the existence of Israel. Lily.
So obviously you had a very passionate speech, and this is a very interesting topic, and it's So throughout your year-long research, is there anything that stands out in particular?
So let me just make sure I understand you correctly. You're asking what is the most interesting thing I've learned? The most interesting thing I've learned. That's tough because I've learned a lot of very interesting things this year. Let's see. Perhaps the fact that the Palestinian refugee crisis has been perpetuated by the UN making the refugee status hereditary and thereby forcing the descendants of the original Palestinian refugees from 1948 to remain in refugee camps and not leave or seek jobs. Not that any of them wanted to. But yeah.
And I'm afraid that's all the time that we have. Well done. You would like,
May I take two more? Is that okay? One.
may take one more?
All right. Okay, cool.
I know this is a topic of great passion and I know your own ethic and research is not spiritual as well. When in your life did it really become so important to you? And I know you lobby that, but when did it really take hold of you to develop this level of passion on this topic?
I think I was 14, and I just started reading Israeli history on my own, and I was very, very impressed. It's a story of miracles, the existence of this country, how they could survive for so long and become this thriving country full of culture and this epic world power that they are today, while being hated by so many. And so when I was 14, I just started reading more into Israeli history, and I just loved it. I thought it was the coolest thing. There are so many miraculous stories of how Israel has survived all these years, and I was like, okay, I'm going to learn Hebrew, I'm going to volunteer for the idea, and I just, yeah, so, yeah.